It's interesting that you just said that, Christy, about if there's something like it must be really wrong if I notice. Reminds me of something I used to say about being sick, like what I could digest. I used to say that I have a cast iron stomach. So if I'm sick, you know something's really, really wrong because I don't throw up. I can't even make myself throw up. I never would have been able to, like, if I had, I might have explored, unfortunately, being a bulimic because of my body image thing. And where this came back around for me was when I was doing some of my trauma training, and she was talking about throwing up. Like, you should be able to throw something up that's toxic to you. You should be able to, to let that out of your body. And I was like, oh my gosh, all this time I thought I had a cast iron stomach, but really all it was is I had learned to eat poison. I had learned to allow all of those toxic thoughts to just exist within me. And it was around that time that I would have, like, I'd get off a coaching call with somebody and my mind would be like, you're such an idiot. You're not helping anybody. What do you think you're doing? You're not qualified to do this. So what? You have a certificate. Who do you think you are? Like, you don't have this ability. And I started realizing, like, not in that moment, because in that moment, prefrontal cortex gone, right? I'm back in my amygdala at that point. But I would journal out all of these awful things I was basically like vomiting up all of these stories, all these thoughts. And then I would go back afterwards when I wasn't in the moment of the response or reaction to what my ego, what my brain was trying to tell me. And then that's when I would sit there. I would imagine that it was my little girl that wrote this, because I even had an experience like that. And I know this month we're talking about relationships. When my daughter was, I think she was like maybe 7 or 8 years old. And we were going the whole, like, should we put her, so she was in second grade. So she might have been a little bit older, like 8 or 9. And we were trying to figure out, does she have the AD thing, right? We put her on meds, and I remember one time her crawling up in my lap and saying, Mommy, I'm just garbage. You should just put me out with the trash.
Right.
Yeah. And so when I would sit down with whatever it was that I journaled out, I would sit down imagining that it was her that wrote that. Whew. Coming in hot today.
I know. I'm like, I feel like that kind of work is so difficult when you do have your own children, to like witness it from their perspective. And like, that's when I think the compassion really steps in for me. Like, I don't think I was able to give myself the compassion, but I was able to give it to other people. So then, like, recognizing how I could transfer that to me, that was a big transition, still is really, but yeah, the act of writing it out.
Yeah.
It's very revealing. So I'm like, what was that statement that we just said? It's bad if I can see it.
Has to be really bad in order for me to see it.
Has to be really bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what a beautiful perspective about, like, thinking that you weren't sick technically, but really it was like your protective mechanism,
Yeah. Yeah. That just, when you said that about your tires and why you were choosing to not go anywhere or do anything today, I was like, oh, yeah. It just reminded me so much of that. Like, if I see it, it must be really bad.
Yeah.
And why we have to wait.
Sometimes it has to get that bad, right? Like, I don't have the awareness to notice when things are starting, like my tires are going bald or something. I don't even know, like some of the language that he was saying. And like, yeah, I wouldn't know that. Like, I don't check my tires. I don't know what to listen for. I don't have it on my calendar when I should change them. You know, like none of this is like the language that I speak. So
I also just noticed, like, Erin, the first place your mind went was, is he just like trying to sell you some new tires?
right.
Trying to trick me?
Of course, that was my perspective too. When I went in, like I walk in and I already notice I have my guard up because I feel like in a really vulnerable space. And he was actually really nice enough to say, come on, let me show you. And I was like, actually, I trust you. Like at that point, I think all he had to do was offer to show me. And I was like, I totally trust you. And then he insisted that I see as if I know what I'm looking at, you know, but yeah.
Guarding you said, I came in really guarded, and it's like, don't take my safety away.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he said, well, here, let me show you, it was almost like in that moment, an immediate safety and trust was established.
Yep.
And we also sometimes tend to do that. Like we give away, at least my pattern has been in the past to just blindly give away trust. Instead of having that moment of discernment, like, how does this actually feel?
Right.
Do I feel like this is trustworthy or not?
Yeah, it's like you're either not judging or judging rather than just going in blank and testing it out to see, like, does this feel good or not? But don't you think that kind of builds on habitual responses of not trusting your gut, right? Like we just kind of.
Yeah, it's all of our old patterns just re-emerging for us to examine them in different ways. It's like whenever you ask for something, the universe is going to show you, if you're willing to see it, where you have that available to you, and also where you have a story about where it's not available to you.
I'm really curious what my subconscious is asking for right now, because it is really giving me a lot.
Well, what I find is so interesting is how this really plays along with our bodies, right? Like if you were to take your car and you were to also associate, like for me, I always had to be like so sick I couldn't get out of bed to actually give myself a break, right? Like we see these, like if you were to take your car as the example, like my brain first went to like, oh, you first like feel like the unevenness on the road, right? Or maybe because and then you might hear, because the tread is getting thinner, you might hear that. And there's just like these little cues along the way until we get to like no tread can see, or, you know, no tread, right?
Yeah.
And same thing with our bodies, and like, right? Like it might start as a little pain or a little like tingle or something like that. And then we just keep ignoring and we keep pushing and keep going. And it's like, when do we stop to, like what Tanya was saying, is like to check in and like, how does it feel?
Yeah.
But perfect with parents, right? Like who teaches us this stuff?
Right. That's what I was just thinking. Like if it's not taught to you, how do you even know? You know?
What a beautiful metaphor with your tires. Like everything has been worn away because it's been used and used and used and never checked in with to see how are you doing and is it still safe, until you get to the point where you're at risk of it completely losing your safety.
Yeah. I'm also realizing this might not, I'm like, how relevant is this? I just got my oil changed like last week because I knew I was making like a road trip this past weekend for Cali. And at no point did they bring that to my attention. I don't know that that's like their responsibility, but I just think I assumed that they're like in that space of like, they know cars, right? kind of like when I think about parents that like take their children to the pediatrician and the pediatricians don't like bring attention to a concern. And they're like, well, it's not a problem because the pediatrician didn't say anything about it. It's like, yeah, pretty interesting.
Everything that's going on for us on the inside is mirrored and reflected and played out for us on the outside. So just notice, like, what came to me was I had a discussion with my husband recently where we were talking about control. Our marriage has always been built on this idea. Something he said time and time again is, you don't try to control me and I don't try to control you. Because we've observed over the course of our marriage, other marriages where it's like the husband will say, well, no, my wife won't let me do that.
Oh yeah.
Or the husband will say, no, I'm not going to allow my wife to do that. And my husband has always said this, like, you don't control me and I don't try to control you. And we were on our way to go pick something up, and we were having a discussion about money and finances and some things, some big transitions that we're in the midst of. And he said something and I didn't necessarily agree with him. He saw it as a black and white thing. I saw it as a gray area thing. Like there was more to it than just a yes or no. And so my response to him was, I hear what you said, because I wanted to validate that I heard what he said. But then that actually upset him because he was like, you're always disagreeing with me lately. And I got really quiet for a few minutes because I was thinking about it. I was like, you want me to agree with you. You want me to see it as black and white in this particular instance, and I can't. And I just hold so much love and compassion because I know this thing that you want me to agree about, that our financial advisor has us on a tight budget, is from a place of fear.
Right.
And so one of the things that I said to him after a few minutes of pausing was, sometimes I have to be careful because I know in the past, I said something about I need to be careful because, you've always said this about control, and yet sometimes I felt like you've controlled me. And then I was like, it's not that you've controlled me, it's just that I've weighed the difficulty or the discomfort of disagreeing with you and chosen not to.
For sure.
So as not to ruffle feathers or create a disconnection. And now that I've found my safety and my unconditional love inside here, I'm like, I can be okay with this being uncomfortable. And so after a few minutes, I said something about, like, after we had gone into the store and came back out, I asked him how he was feeling, and he said, not good, because, like, I don't ever want to control you. And if that's how you're feeling, and I said, let me clarify this here, because what I was realizing in that moment was nobody controls me. I am 100% responsible for how I feel, how I perceive things. Like, there's nothing that he couldn't do, actually. And so I'm thinking about the pediatrician, or not the pediatrician, but the oil change versus the tire guy. It's like, ultimately, we are the ones responsible for how we feel and what we choose to see and what we're ready to see or not see.
Well, and I'm like, yes, of course. I noticed myself thinking about just like the minor insignificant things, which I know everything becomes significant. But when you were talking about that, like, it's easier to just almost like conform than it is to like speak up. And I think about, for me, my schedule right now is a really big thing, right? Like it's just easier for me to say yes to my children than to argue with them or to outsource it, or it's easier to just go along with whatever food preferences my husband has than to like make 7 different things. It's like, but I'm the one that's always conforming most of the time. And I can see that in the past, I would blame that on other people, right? I would blame my frustration on my husband or my children. And it's like, but it was my choice this whole time, right? Like nobody has the opportunity to control me without my consent, essentially, you know, in these very safe moments and examples. But also as a side, it's like when you think you're going to someone and like getting their opinion about something. Yeah, I guess, and I'm seeing my faults in that too. Like I could have been really clear, like, can you check my tires? And I didn't. I was like, just change my oil. So yeah, I could totally see that was my fault there. But
And you might not have had this awareness though.
well, I did have this little indicator that says low tire pressure. And it just always happens in the winter. And I just kind of ignore it. And so I really
Like what we
thought
do
it
with
was,
our bodies and our
I
emotions
know,
all
right?
the time.
I'm like, I just think the indicator's broken.
Not listening. La 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 la.
Oh,
You know what I
while.
was thinking, Christy? What I was also thinking when you said that about the oil change, it was like, oh, what if he's so programmed? Because Jason, previous mechanic, right? And
Mhm.
yes, he kind of like goes above and beyond all the things because he
Mhm.
has his thoughts around safety and moms and babies and all this.
Right, right.
So he probably would have checked tires, but listening to him, it's like when you do an oil change, you're just doing the oil change,
Yes.
right? Like get in,
Yes.
get out. It's like this society that we have of like quick, 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 like
Yep.
do the thing, get done, not on to the next thing versus the slowing down, right?
Yeah.
Like you paying attention to your tire pressure, you making a comment, hey, I know it takes an extra 2 minutes, but can you just take a little quick look, see, you know, versus what are we like rushing to?
Yeah.
Where are we going?
I'm pretty sure I was avoidant of even asking because I don't think I really wanted to know that there was a problem. Yeah. Just in retrospect, like looking at the last 5 days of travel and how many times, yeah, it's kind of sad, really. I mean, I showed up to my neighbor's house on Saturday morning and was like, because my husband was out of town and I couldn't get our air compressor to work. And I'm like, literally, like, listen, I need you to put air in my tire in like 2 minutes flat. And so I pull into his driveway and he said, what happened? And I'm like, I don't know. And I don't have time to figure it out. I just need you to put air in my tire so I can get on the road. It made me think I was like a race car driver making like the fastest pit stop. I'm like, I don't care. Just throw some air in it. Let's go. And Hallie's like, Mom, is your tire gonna like explode or something? I'm like, I hope not. And like, really, I mean, I drove like 2 hours away by myself. Like, okay, Christy, better choices next time. Pay attention to your tires. What else am I avoiding? Not looking at, taking care of. Yeah, I'm not joking. I feel like I have a lot of universal messages being sent to me right now. They are all kind of saying the same thing.
But, you know, when you think about us parenting, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what are we teaching our children too? Like in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
unconsciously showing Callie, like, this isn't important. Whatever we got to go do is more important than like right here, right now. And if we equate that to feelings, right? It's like we've been taught that, right? Like that feelings aren't important, that the doing and the whatever we've, you know, got our mindset on is what we need to focus. We just need to hurry up and do the thing versus going back to like the slowing down, right? And like right here in this moment, is there anything more important than making sure our tires?
No, it's such an interesting like sequence because what I was trying to do was get to her cheer competition on time because her team was relying on her. Right. And like, I always think about the low oil or not, I'm sorry, not low oil, low gas gauge that goes off. And like, how many times have I ran out of gas because I just didn't pay attention to that little thing that says, hey, I'm running low. You might want to put some gas in your car. I mean, it's like the story, right? It's the recirculating story.
Yeah.
And I can see in that moment, like, it is important to get there. But had we blown a tire, like everything would have been messed up, right? It would have like tenfolded the problem. So now I'm like, so do I do a little life evaluation and figure out where else I'm needing to slow down?
But you have had this story, right, of like not enough time.
For sure. For sure. I'm writing that one down.
Without sounding condescending, Christy, I love you so much right now.
Oh, girl, you know, I love it all. Bring it.
So much. When I first started coach training, the thing that I got coached on every damn time, you know, we have to, when we're going through coach training, we have to think up something to be coached on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every damn time I got coached on my calendar.
That was a huge one for me. Huge.
Getting so full and I just don't have time. Like, I remember when Dominique was getting ready to head off to Japan. So this was just over 2 years ago. It was July, and I had finished my coaching certification in April. And because we were getting her ready to move, May and June were just packed with like taking care of all the things that needed to be taken care of for her to move to another country. And so I had just kept putting everything off. And then, so April got done. May was in Maui for the entire month, asking my husband if he could accept me as a life coach and the changes that I was going through. All of June and all of July was delegated to our daughter. And when I looked at my calendar in August, this was that famous moment when Carrie was like, because what did I come to her to be coached on? My effing calendar. And I was like, listen, I pushed everything off into the month of August and I kept saying, oh, now I'm going to have like, now it's time for me to start building my business and doing all of the things. And how can that be so? Because I have packed my calendar so full in August with all the things that didn't happen in May, June, and July. And she was like, and I dare you not to do anything you think you should, you have to, or you need to.
Yep.
That month. And I was like,
right. Feeding the fire type of anxiety. What just came down to me, which is like when I'm listening to you, I'm like noticing my mind is like high chatter today, but pleasing others is more important than my own safety, right? Like it's such subtle messaging, but like Erin, you saying like, what am I teaching my daughter in that moment? Yeah, like being on time is more important than your safety. Making other people happy is more important than your safety.
But when you look at it from that space, right? Like that illusion of safety, right? Like if I upset someone, right? When we think safety happens outside of us rather than within.
Yeah. Yeah, my brain is like a monkey on in a wheel right now. This might be a good thing to like reflect on and meditate on, just to see what else is under there. Because now I'm questioning, like, of course, here comes all the shame, right?
I was gonna be like, and don't turn this into the shame game.
I know, it just totally was. I was like feeling like I was doing it all wrong rather than looking at it like, what am I here to learn? I was getting into my critical brain of like, you should have, and what if you did this, and what would have happened if, right? Like, instead of just like, what are you here to teach me?
That's human nature. That is the way that our minds work. They want to keep us out of danger. So they tell us they have to highlight and point out where we're wrong, because wrong is unpredictable. It's uncertain. Wrong, like
Right.
doing the wrong way, doing it the wrong thing is a loss of safety. Because when you're right, it's predictable. Like the brain can be certain if it says I'm right. It's such a, yeah.
Also, to think about your parents, right? How were we parented? How was, I know my mom, right? Like put everybody before herself. Like, who are our examples to teach us about what's most important, right?
Right. Well, and like also hearing, Tanya, you had shared something. I don't remember who the person was. Maybe if I say it, you'll know. It was a person doing some information. I think the link was from YouTube, but it was all about shame. And sorry, I'm realizing that my computer is plugged in, but the plug is not plugged in.
Yay for awareness.
I mean, here we are. Hey, listen, that little notification popped up and I'm listening. Here we go.
And yay, can we celebrate? Like, this is attention to making sure you stay.
Right? Oh, yeah. She was talking about the difference between like productive shame versus toxic shame. And I think it was
Irene Lyon, and I think it was the thing I shared about anger being, like, anger can be a good thing.
Yep.
And I somewhat agree with her about toxic shame versus like productive shame. I think it's important for us, like, always the contrast. We can't know the other side until, like, we can't know great joy until we've experienced great sadness. We can't know, like, what is shame? If you look at the definition of shame, it's I am bad or I am wrong, not this thing that I did was bad or wrong. Like, we don't want to be labeling any of those things as bad or wrong, because we never are.
Yeah.
And I know some people would be like, wait, what? That's not right. That's wrong, that you can never be wrong.
I know. Right? I'm like, I think that's a whole topic to like unpack. But a lot.
That shame is that I'm bad, I'm wrong. And I think most shame is toxic shame. Our ability to become aware of where we're telling ourselves that story allows us to then liberate ourselves and be free of it if we choose. Like, sometimes we just need to explore shame for a while so that we can find our sense of being safe or not wrong. Because what is I am wrong means I cannot be safe. That goes back to Dr. Gabor Mate's work with wrongness and shame and stuff. Like, in childhood, if we have an experience where we like something happens, maybe we cry and we're not picked up by our adult caregivers, whether it's our parents or the people that are caring for us, we have two things that we can think about in that moment. We can think, I am the problem, or my parents are the problem. My parents aren't capable of caring for me. I'm crying. I have a need that's not being met. And my parents are not capable of caring for me. Well, that's death right there. That's just pure death. My parents are not capable for me of taking care of me. So instead we make well, if I could just be better, do better, be more lovable, be more conforming, then perhaps I will be accepted. We have to make that as I am wrong, or I am doing it wrong. So that's when we get into that whole shame and guilt and
Super deep. Super deep. I found that
practice the opposite, like acknowledge that it's there and then practice the opposite. Imagine yourself as the little one that's saying, I have a need. I mean, that is your thing, right?
Yeah. I'm like,
this child is trying to say, I have this need, and the parent isn't able to hear or receive.
Yeah. I think it's why I like to bring attention to nonverbal communication more than anything, because it's like, what is more pure and genuine than the body telling us what it needs, right? Like words are just an extension of what's happening inside of the body. And when like parents will say like, I just don't understand. And I'm like, just watch them. Like their body tells us a lot. And I just had this conversation yesterday with a mom who's not satisfied with her provider because the child will lose interest and will walk away. And the provider will say, oh, you don't want to play with me anymore? Like kind of make it a problem that they're walking away. And I was like, isn't that just so interesting that it's almost like shame, you know, like a little of a shameful response of this child honoring themselves, right? Like you're not going to sit here and be miserable. You're going to honor your own desire of getting up and moving. And then the adult is the one that doesn't know how to deal with that, you know, so bizarre.
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm like, that's a big deal for me, that nonverbal communication.
Saturday, I spent 7 hours with a very dear friend who I love so much. She was a nail client for so many years, almost my entire 30-year career of doing nails. And she was a ballet dancer and teacher, and also was trained in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, right? The language of the body. The interesting thing is like, well, I love the synchronicities in life, like the serendipitous moments. The person that she trained with and learned NLP from was one of my high school teachers, Michael Grinder. And then, so all throughout our relationship, sitting across the table from each other every couple of weeks for nail appointments, we talked about all kinds of belief and identity levels, Robert Dilts, and we talked about NLP. And when we were talking on Saturday, we were just talking about this very thing. She's like, words don't teach. We've heard Abraham say that. If anybody follows Abraham, they would have heard Esther, speak for Abraham that words don't teach, experience does. We show so much through our body language, and so like recognizing all the little subtle clues that may have been missed. And the thing that our minds want to do is language everything. They tell the story of the nonverbal that was created in the body from a very early age. And oftentimes it was created in our parents, and they're just remodeling for us what they learned, and so on and so on. I mean, think about, what's your mom like, Christy?
Like me times 25. like selfless is like gonna be on her tombstone, to the point where when people say it to her now, I'm like, stop, please. She's like running herself into the ground.
Does she
Physically,
pride herself on
emotionally.
it?
I don't know that she prides herself, but she certainly gets joy. Like that is
yeah.
her, it's like her purpose.
Identification.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
And even, which is really interesting, I have two younger sisters that have young children. One doesn't live in town, one does. And our neighbor, I'm sorry, my mom's neighbor has a young child. And it's almost like she's taken over this like role of grandmother-ish type of thing. And my sister and I were talking about it the other day. I'm like, I can totally see why, because she's not needed, like raising children for 30 years. I don't know if that's how many, probably longer, 50 years, 45 years. Let's go for 45 years. And now to like have nothing to take care of, So now she's like letting it overflow into her neighbors.
It's like where we find our worth, right? That's so similar to my mom, right? Like
1000%.
right? If she doesn't feel needed, what does she,
Oh yeah.
where are we getting that from?
Yeah. And like she has MS, and in my opinion, should retire to prioritize her own health. And that is a great source of being needed, her job. Like everybody there kind of needs her.
Here we go back to the body, right? Like,
Mhm.
Oh yeah, screaming, listen to me.
For years.
Listen to me.
For years.
MS is a loss. It's like a loss of power. Literally, it is a loss of power. Yeah. Where the nerve endings start to change. And then think about RA. It's that extreme inflammation of like the like an absence of nurturing and an absence of soothing.
Wow.
Back to the love and power thing. Because I think, Christy, I think your mom is love, and Erin, your mom, we talked about as power.
Power. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a very interesting perception for me, because my mom grew up with 8 brothers. And so her affection is through like sarcasm, also through doing, right? But like, she's not a super sensitive person. She would like, and I kind of do this too. I noticed that in heightened emotion, I will like kind of throw in a joke just to almost like buffer the emotion.
Connect. Yeah, keep the connection.
Yeah. And it's like, because being vulnerable is just way too hard sometimes. I don't even do it consciously. It just kind of happens. So I think that's really interesting for me to see my mom as like more love than power. Yeah.
Think of how your dad, though, the conversations you've had with, I'm sure with Tanya too, right? But like you and I, you've talked to me about how your dad has done some things or said some things, and she acquiesces.
Always.
Right?
Always.
Versus when I think of power, I'm like, I want to get in your face and I want to fight, right?
Yeah.
Like, versus the love, like, oh, I'm so sorry, or she doesn't have to say sorry, but
Yeah. I'm just realizing that yesterday I had a conversation with her about my tires. I'm like, gosh, this dang tire conversation just keeps circulating.
Love you so much, Christy.
I feel like I'm like the main character of the movie, and there's been like 17 foreshadowing events to like the main. Like, did you not see the man go into the shed with the hammer and he's going to kill you, and you just keep going into the shed? Oh gosh. Yeah. Anyway, the way that my father handles my mom. So my mom and I basically did the same exact thing with our cars. I'm just like seeing this. And my dad handles it much differently than my husband. And I'm realizing the shame response that I'm expecting my husband to say is what my father says to my mother. So fascinating. Like my husband doesn't even have to be in the conversation. And I've already like made him the bad guy. He's the villain.
You've already felt it.
Yeah, it's already there.
Your body, so it's real.
Yeah.
And then that's what you attract. And then they end up saying something that you end up perceiving.
Yes.
They might as well have said the exact thing.
He asked me, what happened? And I took that as like, you
what
are
happened?
wrong.
Did you screw
What's
up?
wrong with you?
Right.
Why were you paying attention?
Not like curiously asking me what happened. And he was out of town too. So he probably felt very powerless because he didn't have a position of being able to help in any way. And he's trying to give me instruction. And I'm like,
because you totally were not safe.
I'm like, Tanya, wasn't this my new era is my deafness or whatever?
We're in the 43rd key or gate, depending on like if you're looking at Gene Keys or Human Design right now, which has a shadow of deafness.
Yeah. And I was like, what is the shadow of deafness? And she's like, you can't hear. I'm like, listening. I'm like, where am I not listening?
And are you about to like pee your pants?
Everywhere? Gosh. Can I just be like, oh, God. I feel like I'm a cartoon character right now. Like
all are, we're all characters in just this
Yes.
grand thing that we
For
call
sure.
life.
For sure. It's just comical. I am appreciative that I can, number one, like I'm super appreciative of my safety, like that we did get to and fro. No tragedies, for anybody, but also that I can just like laugh about it, learn from it, laugh about it. Yeah, that I am
because
kind of
probably
recognizing.
I was going to say a couple of years ago, you probably wouldn't have, right? Like, think of how
No.
far you've grown. Like, you would have been shame storm for
shame. Like
weeks.
I don't know that I would have gotten out of bed, like not literally. I would have numbed myself in some capacity to be able to function. But yeah, it would have just been like the crap that I feel right now would have been intensified probably times 5.
That's the journey, right? It's decreasing the refractory time that you end up in the soup, in the chrysalis is like, I'm not the caterpillar, I'm not the butterfly, I'm just a bunch of goo right now.
Oh.
It decreases that refractory time for the transition, the transformation, and you start getting good at being able to do it at the next level, and then the next level, and then the next level.
Yeah. I feel like, what did we talk about? Was it like the drowning? Is that what was my metaphor? I don't remember that last phase or whatever. Either way, it was like just one thing after the next, that whole, like when it rains, it pours type of thought.
Being deep in the water and it's dark and there's no way to, like, how am I going to get out of this?
Yes. Yep. And I noticed today I had a moment where I could just like be still. And I noticed my brain was just trying to figure it all out. Like even just the timing of things and emails that I have to send, right? Like just all this stuff. And I actually felt myself thinking I was like in water, struggling for air, right? And noticing, like, obviously I know I'm not in water, I'm not drowning. And just telling myself, like, just surrender. just like allow yourself to just like be still and allow it to feel light. Like just for a minute, just like give yourself a break. And I could, but then I go right back into drowning. Anyway.
That's part of the practice, right? It's like I was talking about in our Marco Polo group, the idea that we can face those fears and we can remind ourselves we're okay, we're okay, we're okay. And each time we come through one of those layers, we're stronger for it. Like for me, in the car ride with my husband and him saying, well, don't you think it's this way? And me going, I hear what you're saying. I'm not going to agree or disagree with you. And he still was upset about it. It was like, I can be safe, not just going along to say what it is that I think he wants to hear from me. Oh yeah. You know, yeah, I see this too. Like for me, it was always you compromise yourself for someone else so that you can maintain that attachment, because I had a core wound that, you know, probably was my mother's as well as my grandmother's. When you make them angry, they leave. I remember when I first had that awareness pop up over the garbage can incident, that I was like, whoa. So each time I had the experience of either speaking up what I want or saying how I feel, knowing that that might be received by someone as, I don't agree with you, or you're wrong, or that's not okay for you to say that. And I survive, it's like, oh, I can survive this. I'm in the process of completely rebuilding my entire nervous system.
Yeah. I'm like just noticing, I know this is like a very tangential, but like I see it like as a parallel. The conversations I have with parents, it's often like keeping the peace with the teacher, with the daycare worker, with a husband, with a grandmother, right? It's like keeping the peace with somebody else. And in between them is their child, right? Like the thing that is of conflict is something in relation to the child. And I will often say like, well, have you had that conversation have you expressed your concerns? And they'll say, I'm not confrontational. I don't like conflict. Like, isn't that so interesting to think that the first thing that comes up is that it's confrontational, right? Like to just have a conversation about something that's important to you doesn't feel safe. And then there's like layers of fear behind it. Like, well, what if they do this, you know? So interesting.
And it's the same, like Erin, I know she'd be like, I'll fight you. Like I'll come at you. I'm not afraid of the confrontation. But it's the same thing. My husband and I, not that long ago, David said, when I said something about like completely considering other people's feelings or completely not considering other people's feelings, and he's like, it's the same thing. And I was like, that broke my brain a little bit for a second, but then I realized, I'm like, yeah, it's either giving all of your power away or giving like no power to anyone else. Same kind of thing. Yeah.
And the idea.
And does it need to be black and white? Like, can there be an and, you know, like I get super literal and I'm like, it's this way or this way. And it's like, or it could be right here in the middle.
I was going to say is our binary, right? Like it's somebody or this idea, this lack, right? That somebody has to lose. I mean, that's been a big one for me, right? Like if I get it, then someone else doesn't. Or if
Yes.
I will get what I want, someone has to give up, right? Like, and just how can it be the and a win for both parties? And can it not just be a conversation? How quickly your parents, right, go to, not your physical birth parents, but your parents that you coach, right? Like how quickly they go to, it's going to be a confrontation versus what if it's just a conversation?
Yeah.
I picked my parents up from the airport yesterday and I told Jason, I was like, I was sweating so much. And I was like, oh, isn't this fascinating? Because I have some memories of childhood, right? But I don't have I don't feel like I have a whole lot, but like the energy of what it was, like I was already anticipating a tense, right? Like your parents saying, well, it's going to be confrontational. Like it's going to be this tense conversation versus like, this is what I'm experiencing or my child's experiencing. What are you experiencing? Let's have the conversation versus we're going to go at it with,
Right. Because of course, when you think there's going to be a problem or a confrontation, then you go up like defensively or aggressively, right? And it's like when you can go in with like curiosity and just explore it and see where it leads, it's a completely different conversation.
It's law of attraction. There is no law of assertion. So you can't put something into someone else's experience. With the law of attraction, you're going to get what it is that you're putting out. So if you come with confrontation, you're going to be met with confrontation, and that's going to just revalidate that experience in your life versus being able to start shaking some of the things loose, right? Us always reminding ourselves, if we come at it from curiosity instead of the expectation of what has been, what could maybe get allowed to be shaken up loose, to allow us to feel differently so that we start bringing in something that's different.
Yeah. And that is such an interesting thing. I feel like I need to explore that a little bit more because there are times that I will ask questions, even in my house, with curiosity, and I am matched with a defense. And I'm like, wait a second, I think you misinterpreted what I was bringing to you. I'm like genuinely curious. I'm not assuming anything. I really want to hear your perspective. And does that make sense? Like they were kind of
it totally does.
Thinking from their past experiences, even maybe with me, right? But they weren't like either reading my energy or there wasn't like a connection.
That's the playground in life. Like we put out the story, or we put out what it is that we want to change and transform. Like for me, it's having the power to just be myself, to be in my authority, to be my authentic self. And so I would, from my perspective, I would say you're just exploring this idea that, okay, I'm in a place where I can come in with curiosity and I meant with this defensiveness, and how safe can I be in allowing them to show me this defensiveness and feel okay in that. Like as a manifest generator, we're a little bit of shit stirrers. We have to be able to create a little bit of chaos, but when we are stuck in this place of it's not safe for me to be curious, it's not safe for me to explore, that's when we always end up shut down because we're wrong.
For sure.
So it's like practice. Oh, I can be curious. I can notice their defensiveness and not make it mean anything about me.
Yeah. And I think there's that probably the peacekeeper that needs to come through in me, right? Like when I do feel like someone responds with defense, I think it's my job to adjust.
And it is, but not for them.
For me.
For you.
Yeah.
That's that being responsible. We can only be
Mhm.
responsible for how we feel.
Yeah.
That's totally it. It's an
Mhm.
opportunity to practice. Ooh, I'm going to give myself peace in this moment.
You know, that's such an interesting, I know I have to go at 4. Sorry, I just am like watching the clock for that reason. That's such an interesting perspective that you're bringing up, because I feel like my story has always been to keep the peace. And ironically, I do stir up some shit as well. And I'm not hesitant to speak up in a lot of situations. But there has been a story that I've like judged my peacekeeper and my conformist type of people pleasing. And I'm like, and now recognizing that part of that was for my peace, right? Like making other people happy was also for me too. Like I didn't totally exclude myself in that. I was involved in it. Yeah.
This is Jason.
Mm-hmm.
This is when he notices me and Grayson having this, he immediately steps in to try to fix, because his 3 sisters and mother, it was just the chaoticness all the time. And so I have to fix it so I can be still in here.
Yep. That's how I am with Craig and Max, which they don't butt heads too often, but when they do, it's pretty ugly. And I can go toe to toe with Max and not have a problem rocking the boat. But when I watch other people, I'm wrecked. So wild. That's why I don't like to watch. What's the one where they get in the cage and they just beat the crap out of each other?
MMA.
Yeah, cannot. Every part of my body tenses up. I'm like this the whole time. Oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? Meanwhile, my mother-in-law loves it. I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like, why do you like this stuff? She loves it.
Your
She's like
mother-in-law?
yeah, and she's like the kindest human. So interesting to me. I'm like, nope.
Yep. Another great conversation.
Always.
So much gratitude for both of you.
Mm-hmm.
Fun.
I needed
Lots of
that
fun.
today. I'm like, I noticed like my whole body just like came down. I came in here with a lot of whirling, feeling like a tornado's inside my body.
Okay. Until next time.
Until next time. Bye, ladies.
Bye.